Hey guys, so this is AP World History, Chapter 5, Early Society in East Asia. And today we're going to look at the political organization in early China. These next few videos will be covering the Jia, the Shang, and the Zhao dynasties. So the first thing we're going to look at is how these dynasties were established. Okay, so kind of just to give you a sense of the areas that we're talking about, um, this is obviously the China that we know today. And these were the two main rivers that we're looking. The Yellow River, which is pretty much where a lot of the dynasties were located. And then we also have the Yangtze River as well, which we'll talk about later with other societies. So it starts with the early agriculture and the Jia dynasty. The Yellow River gives you a little bit of information about the Yellow River. That's the Yellow River right there. So it's almost 3,000 miles long, and it's also known as the Wanghe, which means Yellow River. Its nickname is China's Sorrow, and the reason for this is because it caused a lot of destruction. It would alter its course. It was very unpredictable, and this unpredictability led to a lot of destruction on the part of the river. However, it did also provide an agriculture that was able to thrive because of the low S soil that was in the Yellow River. That's what gives it its color is the low S. So what ends up happening is that the silt and the soil goes into the river and it gets so fertile that when it floods these areas, it provides all that soil into the land and hence gives it a good agricultural surplus. So it talks about a couple of Neolithic societies that existed before the dynasties, before the Jia, the Zhang, and the Zhao. And those were the Yangshuo and the Banpo village. This is the area where they were thought to have probably existed. And this is probably how they thought that these villages, how they lived in like kind of hut-looking tenements. So again, it's the Neolithic village. They know they existed because they've found pottery and bone tools, so that would give clues that there was a village there. And then as the population increased, settlements cropped up in the valley of the Yangtze River and the Yellow River. So those were the two main rivers for China. And then later on, the Jia, the Zhang, and the Zhao dynasties, they'll emerge, and they will be the hereditary states that are going to control pretty much most of China during this time. So important to note the idea of hereditary states, meaning that if something's hereditary, it's going to be passed down from generation to generation. And this is where we get this idea of a dynasty. Okay, so the power is going to be passed down from father to son or grandfather to father to son and so on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how they maintain power in a later video. The first dynasty we're going to look at is going to be the Jia dynasty. So right here, this was the Jia dynasty, this little area right here. So not very large, didn't control a lot, but back then um, it was the first efforts to control public life. Okay. And again, it's this idea of a dynasty. The dynasty was the founder, King Yu. And really, what the government did was that it organized large projects. And by organizing these large projects, by getting people to help them to organize these large projects, people were going to recognize the authority of the Jia dynasty. And they were going to see that these were the rulers that were in charge of the area. In addition to that, the dynasty also promoted selflessness, social harmony, and hard work. And if you think about that, think about the relationship between, having to organize these public works and why they would promote these ideas of selflessness, social harmony, and hard work. They kind of go together. So the dynasty encouraged founding of cities and the development of metallurgy, especially bronze metallurgy. That was going to be very big until we come into iron. Arolito may have been the capital from some of the excavations we've seen. And then this is some of the metallurgy that they made. Possible Jia wine jug here. So your first discussion question, why do you think the Jia dynasty promoted this idea of selflessness, social harmony, and hard work? Okay, the next dynasty is the Shang dynasty. So again, here you see the Jia, the small, in comparison to the Shang, which obviously grew in all directions. And again, they were able to really enforce their authority over others because of two things: the bronze metallurgy and the horse drawn chariots. So the technology aids in the Shang success. Bronze may be used to beat their competitors because other people were still using wood tools, wood weaponry. They were able to use bronze, and not only that, they pretty much hoarded the bronze. Like, it was really only for the wealthy, the elites, the high class. In addition to that, they also use they also use chariots. So similar to the Indo-Europeans who discovered the chariots or created the chariots, the Chinese took from them, okay, through their interactions that they came upon with the Indo-Europeans. So this is just an example of an artifact of the chariots that the Chinese used to use. And what they would do is they would assign government craftsmen to create weaponry for the Shang rulers and armies. And there was, again, no use of public bronze anywhere. So this idea of hoarding and keeping bronze to themselves was really big. And they sometimes would also use the bronze for the horse fittings, to make sure that, the horse was fitting onto the chariot correctly. And the way that they pretty much collected taxes was through agriculture, imposed the rule on agricultural villages, and that's really also how they were able to pay their military, was through this agricultural surplus that they got. In terms of political organization, they really relied heavily on their allies. It was not necessarily a centralized authority, but pretty much a network of towns that recognized the authority of the Shan King. So you're really relying on somebody just to be loyal to you in order for them not to attack you. Others who shared agricultural surplus and who also influenced the Shang policies were the advisors, the ministers. So they all benefited from the agriculture that they were gaining from these small villages and towns. And the Shang dynasty revolved around this large city, but it was thought that they moved the capital 6 times, probably because of military attacks or military advantages. So this is what they think that one of the capital cities looked like. One of the capitals themselves possibly could have looked like. One of the capitals they talk about is the capital of Ao, and this was the earliest one that we have any record of. And the way we know that it was probably a capital was because of the city walls. The city walls were 33 feet high and 66 feet thick, and what they did was they pretty much compounded dirt. They compounded it so much that it almost became like a stone, and then they just added on top of that. So the next discussion questions: what can you infer about bronze in the Shang dynasty, and why do you think a non-central authority worked for the Shang? The other capital that they look at is the capital of Yin, and this was probably the capital with in the last 2 or 3 centuries of the Shang. And again, the way they're able to tell that it was probably a main center capital was because of the structures they found there. They found large palaces. They also found written text, and they also saw that there were neighborhoods around the area that would also suggest that the capital was like kind of the main center, the hub. Not only that, they found tombs for kings, so that was another kind of giveaway that this was a capital. The tombs often had sacrificial victims that would go on to the afterlife with the kings, and similar to Egypt in that way, where they were having these sacrificial victims that were going to help them in the afterlife, and how they also took all their possessions, similar to Egypt, into the tomb with them. These are some artifacts from the Lady Fu Hao tomb. And again, it just kind of adds to the idea, and these are bronze artifacts. It adds to the idea that bronze was important to them and that it was in high abundance with the ruling elites. Moving on to Lady Fu Hao. She was one of 64 wives of the king, Shang King Wu Ding. And for some reason, they were able to get to this tomb because a lot of grave robbers didn't know it was there because it was actually inside the palace. So, because of that, they were able to really see what was being buried with people who were in the higher ruling status. So, they found about like 468 bronze objects, they found jade, they found cowrie shells, again, the human sacrifice. And like I said, it just shows how valuable the things they had were. So, still with the Shang dynasty, while the Xia and the Shang ruled the Yellow River Valley, there were other areas that were also in existence. So, don't think the Xia and the Shang, that's all there was. Okay, there were still other areas that were there, and they ruled simultaneously in the same time as the Xia and the Shang dynasties that were there. Okay, so based on the tomb of Lady Fu Hao, what can you infer about the importance of her? So moving on to the Zhao dynasty, and just keep in mind that um, these are happening one right after the other. So it's the Jia, the Shang, and the Zhao. Okay. So I just want to show you. We already saw the map. This is the Jia, this small little piece, this red area here. This is the Shang dynasty. And then when the Zhao dynasty comes, it's that gray. So it's everything inside and then the gray as well. So you can see again the expansion that the Zhao dynasty um, has. So essentially, what happened is that the last Shang king, he's going to give himself up to many vices. That he was really involved with women, with greed, tyranny, that kind of thing. And this made it easy for the Zhao to come in and kind of take over. And it resulted in towns and political districts who changed the allegiance to the Zhao, pretty much saying, hey, you know what? This person can no longer take care of us, and the Zhao are willing to take care of us and can take care of us, then we're going to change our allegiance to the Zhao. And so the Zhao would seize the forces in the Shang capital of Yin. They would behead the king, and then they would replace his government with their own government. And it allowed the Shang heirs to rule small district but reserved the right to rule throughout the realm. So pretty much almost similar in terms of ruling, that they had these alliances that were being made, and they enforced these alliances through marriage as well. So this was kind of their way to keep a loyalty. And then this would be the Zhao at its greatest extent, all the dark green, right? And the black lines represent great walls built by the Zhao. So these lines right here. So when the Zhao dynasty comes into power, they use something called the mandate of heaven to enforce their rule or to justify them coming into power. And pretty much what it is that they said that the heavenly powers are granting them the right to govern. It's the mandate. They're giving them this mandate to govern, and they give it to them as long as they are taking care of the land and taking care of the people in the land. So the ruler would serve as this link between heaven and earth. So they're not like Egyptians where it's like a demigod. They don't see him like that. They're just saying the heavens are giving me the power to rule, and as long as I'm doing everything right, then the power will stay with my dynasty, with my family. So it's important that you observe high standards, maintain order, harmony, and as long as you did this, you would have control. But once things started to go bad, once things were in a decline, or there was, poor agriculture being produced, or there was a lot of infighting, then that left room for somebody else to come in and claim the mandate. So here's just kind of an example how it works. The new dynasty is born, and the new emperor makes changes to the government and other systems to make the empire run, and then everything works better in the empire for a little while. The government becomes competent, everything's good, but then famine and natural disaster destroy things. The commoners become tired. The dynasty is considered to have lost the mandate, and the current emperor is defeated. So it's just a cycle, this idea of the mandate. But again, that's what they used. So the Zhao was much larger than the Shang. They practiced a decentralized administration. Again, the idea that we're going to rely on the alliances, we're going to rely on our subordinates, and the subordinates are the people who are under them, the people who are taking care of these cities and towns and villages and stuff like that. And we're hoping that they're going to show allegiance to us, that they will give tribute to us, and in addition to that, give us military support. And in return, we'll protect them, we'll provide them with some sort of agricultural surplus. So the Zhao rulers sought to arrange marriages, like I had mentioned, in order to strengthen these political allies. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So the discussion question, why do you think the Chinese dynasties continue to have a decentralized rule? We saw it in the Shang, we saw it here with the Zhao. Why do you think they keep on having this? And then number 6, create a Venn diagram comparing and contrasting the Egyptian leaders to the Chinese leaders. All right, so the weakening of the Zhao, the subordinates will gradually establish their own bases of power. So essentially, what begins to happen is these people that they're just relying on to be their allies, they kind of begin to say, you know what, we really don't need the Zhao. We are pretty much ruling our own area. We don't need you to help us, to take care of us. So these subordinates begin to set up their own regional bureaucracies, armies, and tax systems, and totally going against the Zhao. And as they become more secure in their own rule, they kind of rely less and less on the Zhao dynasty. And the subordinates would sometimes even ignore um, their obligations to go to the capital and give tribute and that kind of thing. So, one of the big things that happens with the Zhao is that they also control the bronze in their area. Okay. They also control the bronze in their area and they limit it only to the ruling elites. But what begins to happen is that iron comes in. And so the subordinates will move quickly to establish ironworks and outfit their forces that way. And they devise their own weaponry. And so they really have something to fight against. It's almost like, okay, it's okay, you're taking the bronze, fine. We got iron. We have something better and we'll equip ourselves with this and we'll pretty much, defend ourselves against you with it. So some of the reasons for the collapse of the Zhao were the nomadic peoples that invaded China during an ineffective king. The territorial princes, the subordinates, ignored the central government and they built up their own, armies and they strengthened themselves through this use of iron as well. So after the Zhao ends, you have all these little kings, pretty much fighting for power in the Chinese area. And here's a map of all the different little, you know, um, ruling states fighting against each other. And this was known as a period of warring states. So after the Zhao ends, the kings abdicated and everybody's kind of fighting against each other. And it's not going to be until the Qin dynasty will pretty much win out and establish stability in China. So your last discussion question here, of the reasons provided as to why Zhao dynasty ended, which do you think was most likely to have occurred and why? All right, so the next time we will look at the society and family in ancient China.